A single act of kindness can change a life, but what if it shatters it first? For Olivia Vance, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt and despair, giving away her only umbrella during a Boston downpour, was a simple, unthinking gesture. She offered a moment of shelter to a stranger, a man with eyes as stormy as the sky, and never expected to see him again. She was wrong. He returned not as a grateful stranger, but as Damian Blackwood, a reclusive billionaire with an offer that felt more like a cage than a lifeline. This is the story of how one small good deed spirals into a world of corporate warfare family secrets and a devastating choice between saving the one you love and losing yourself. The rain didn't just fall on Boston that Tuesday in October. It waged war. It came down in thick grey sheets, drumming a frantic rhythm against the windows of the Beacon Grill and turning the streets of the Back Bay into murky, reflective rivers. Inside the diner was an oasis of warmth and the comforting smell of coffee and frying bacon. For Olivia Vance, it was both a sanctuary and a prison. She moved between tables with an economy of motion born from 6 years of practice. A pot of coffee in one hand, a plate of pancakes in the other, a small, weary smile fixed on her face. Each customer saw a pleasant, efficient waitress with auburn hair, tied back in a messy but practical bun, and kind hazel eyes that seemed to see a little more than they let on. No one saw the calculator whirring constantly in her head. Tip from table 4, 475. Rent due, Friday, want $850. Daniel's medication, copay $280. Electric bill past due, $112. Total needed a miracle. Her younger brother Daniel was the sun her world orbited around. At 17, he should have been worried about college applications and prom dates. Instead, his life was a cycle of doctor's appointments, physical therapy sessions, and the frustrating limitations of a rare degenerative muscle disease that had crept into their lives 4 years ago. The experimental treatments kept it at bay, but they were astronomically expensive, and their insurance, a flimsy plan she paid for out of pocket, viewed them as a luxury. So Olivia worked. She worked double shifts at the diner, picked up freelance proofreading jobs online that left her eyes burning at 2 a.m., and sold nearly every valuable thing their parents had left them. Another refill. Liv asked George, a regular who had been occupying the same corner booth every weekday morning for a decade. Coming right up George, she said, her voice cheerful, betraying none of the exhaustion that had settled deep into her bones. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival with a gust of wind and a spray of cold rain. A man stood silhouetted against the deluge water cascading from his dark, impeccably tailored suit. It was the kind of suit Olivia only ever saw in magazines, a deep charcoal wool that probably cost more than her share of the diner's monthly profit. But it was utterly comically soaked. His black hair was plastered to his forehead, and his face was stark, all sharp angles and shadows. He didn't look lost or annoyed. He looked furious, not at the rain, but at the world itself. He strode to the counter, dripping a puddle onto the worn linoleum. Every eye in the diner followed him. He exuded an aura of intense, coiled energy, a predator accidentally wandering into a petting zoo. Just coffee, he clipped his voice, a low baritone that vibrated with tension. He didn't look at her instead, staring out the window at the storm as if he could intimidate it into stopping. Olivia poured the coffee into a thick ceramic mug. Cream or sugar? He finally turned his head, and she found herself pinned by the most startling pair of eyes she had ever seen. They were a deep, turbulent grey, like the storm clouds outside, and they held a profound, unsettling weariness. For a split second, the anger in them was eclipsed by a flash of raw vulnerability. It was a look she recognized, the look of someone pushed to their absolute limit. It was the look she saw in her own mirror most mornings. "Black," he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. He took the mug and retreated to a small, isolated booth in the back, away from the chatter of the regulars. He didn't drink the coffee. He just sat there, staring into the mug, his broad shoulders slumped. Olivia watched him from behind the counter, a strange pang of empathy cutting through her own fatigue. He looked like a man who had lost a battle, or perhaps was about to. Her shift ended an hour later. The rain had, if anything, intensified. She clocked out, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her uniform, and grabbing the only thing of value she carried with her, a large, sturdy, cherry-red umbrella. It had been her mother's, one of the last cheerful things she owned. As she pushed open the diner door, the wind nearly tore it from her grip. She saw the man from the back booth standing under the diner's inadequate awning, staring into the downpour with a look of grim resignation. He was preparing to walk into it, to be completely swallowed by the storm. He had no coat, no bag, and certainly no umbrella. Something in Olivia, the part of her that wasn't yet calloused over by hardship, couldn't let it go. It was a stupid, impractical impulse. She needed that umbrella. Her walk to the tea station was 10 minutes, and she couldn't afford to get sick. Missing a shift would be catastrophic, but the look in his eyes, that flicker of shared despair, stayed with her. She walked over to him. He didn't seem to notice her until she was right beside him. "Here," she said, holding out the red umbrella. He turned his head, his grey eyes filled with surprise, suspicion. "What, take it?" she insisted, pushing it towards his hand. "You look like you need it more than I do. It's a bad day to be caught out." He stared at the umbrella, then back at her face, a deep furrow forming between his brows. He seemed utterly baffled by the gesture. "I don't have any cash on me." She almost laughed. Did he think she was selling it? "It's not for sale, it's a gift, or a loan. Whatever, just take it." He hesitated for a long moment, his gaze searching her face, as if looking for a hidden angle, a trick. He found none. There was only a tired waitress, with rain starting to dampen the shoulders of her jacket. Slowly, his hand reached out, and his fingers brushed against hers as he took the handle. His hand was cold. "Thank you," he said the words, sounding foreign and stiff on his tongue, as if he hadn't used them in a long time. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes," she said, giving him a small, genuine smile before pulling her collar up and stepping out from under the awning. She plunged into the rain, gasping as the icy water immediately soaked through her hair and jacket. She hunched her shoulders and began the quick, miserable walk to the station, not looking back. She didn't see the man, Damien Blackwood, standing perfectly still watching her go. He didn't open the umbrella. He just stood there, clutching the warm, worn handle of the red umbrella, as if it were a lifeline, his stormy eyes following her retreating figure until she disappeared into the grey blur of the city. He had just walked out of a boardroom after a brutal personal betrayal that threatened to cost him his family's multi-billion-dollar empire. He had come out into the rain seeking to feel something, anything other than cold fury, and a stranger, a waitress who likely had nothing, had just given him her only shelter. 3 weeks passed. The red umbrella and the stranger who carried it away faded from Olivia's mind, displaced by the more pressing and persistent anxieties of her life. The memory of the man's intense grey eyes occasionally surfaced in the quiet moments before, sleep a fleeting curiosity, but reality always came crashing back in with the morning alarm. Daniel had a bad spell. The weakness in his legs became more pronounced, and a new frightening tremor started in his hands. Their specialist, Dr. Matthews at Massachusetts General, spoke in hushed, serious tones about the disease progressing faster than anticipated. He mentioned a new cutting-edge gene therapy trial being conducted by a Swiss biomedical firm Viridian dynamics. He called it a potential game changer, a phrase that glittered with hope before he delivered the crushing blow. The initial cost for evaluation and the first round of treatment, not covered by any insurance, was $250,000. $250,000. The number was so absurd, so cosmically out of her reach, that Olivia felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. She swallowed it down, replacing it with a grim, hard knot of determination. She took on more work, her life becoming a frantic blur of 20-hour days. She gave up her late-night proofreading for a less mentally taxing but more physically grueling job stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store after her diner shift. Sleep became a luxury she indulged in for 3 or 4 hours a night. Dark circles bloomed under her eyes, and a constant thrumming exhaustion became her new normal. She was scrubbing ketchup stains off the counter at the diner, one bleak November afternoon, the sky outside the color of lead when a car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a taxi or a family sedan. It was a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, a silent, monolithic beast of a vehicle that seemed to absorb the light around it. It was so out of place in front of the humble diner that it looked like a spaceship had landed. The back door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. He was no longer the drenched, furious man from the storm. This man was the very picture of wealth and power. His black hair was perfectly styled. His charcoal suit was razor-sharp and clearly dry, and he moved with an unnerving stillness and confidence. But then he turned his head towards the diner, and she saw his eyes. The same stormy, intense grey. It was him. He walked into the diner, and this time the silence that fell was not one of mere curiosity, but of awe and intimidation. He ignored the stares, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on her. He walked directly to her end of the counter. "Olivia Vance?" he asked. His voice was the same low baritone, but now it held no tension, only a cool, unnerving authority. She just stared, her mind struggling to connect the man from the storm with the titan of industry standing before her. How did he know her name? Her hand holding a damp rag froze in mid-air. "Yes," she managed, her voice a little shaky. "My name is Damien Blackwood," he said, as if this should mean something to her. It didn't. The name was unfamiliar. "May I have a moment of your time? It's important." Her boss, Mr. Henderson, a balding man with a perpetual nervous sweat, scurried over. "Is there a problem?" Sir Damien Blackwood didn't even glance at him. His eyes remained locked on Olivia. "There is no problem. I am here to speak with Ms. Vance. Privately." The implicit command in his tone was absolute. Mr. Henderson nodded nervously and gestured towards a booth. Of course. Liv, take a break." Her legs felt strangely disconnected from her body as she slid into the worn vinyl seat opposite him. He sat with perfect posture, his hands resting on the table. She noticed he was holding something. The red umbrella. It was closed, perfectly dry, looking as vibrant as the day she'd given it to him. He pushed it gently across the table towards her. "I believe this is yours." "Oh," she said, her fingers closing around the familiar handle. "Thank you. I'd forgotten about it." "I haven't," he said, his expression unreadable. "I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to find you. Find me." "Why?" she asked, bewildered. "I had my people run a search for waitresses in the Back Bay area who matched your description. It was more difficult than I anticipated," he explained calmly, as if deploying a private investigative team to find a waitress was the most normal thing in the world. "Your act of kindness that day was unexpected. I wanted to repay you for it." He slid a business card across the table. It was thick, heavy cardstock, embossed with a simple, elegant crest. Damien Blackwood, CEO, Ethelred Capital. Olivia's breath caught. Even she had heard of Ethelred Capital. They were a global investment leviathan, a name synonymous with ruthless acquisitions and obscene wealth. Stories about their reclusive, brilliant, and utterly merciless CEO were legend in the financial pages she sometimes glanced at. That CEO was the man she had given her mother's umbrella to. "I don't need repayment," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It was just an umbrella." "To you, perhaps," he replied, his grey eyes seeming to look straight through her into the heart of her exhaustion and worry. "Ms. Vance, I am not a man who believes in simple gestures. Everything has a value. Everything has a consequence. I had my team do more than just find your name. I know about your brother Daniel. I know about his condition. And I know about the Viridian Dynamics trial." A cold dread washed over Olivia, so potent it made her feel nauseous. He had investigated her. This powerful, untouchable man had peeled back the layers of her private life, her deepest fears, her most desperate hopes. It felt like a violation. How? She started, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "I am a very resourceful man," he said, cutting her off. "The cost of the trial is prohibitive. Your current financial situation makes it impossible. That is a fact. Correct?" She couldn't speak. She could only nod, the hard knot in her stomach tightening. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low conspiratorial murmur. The diner, with its cheerful clatter and smells of coffee, seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of intense, terrifying possibility. "I am in a position to change that fact," he said. "I can pay for it. All of it. The evaluation, the treatments, the aftercare. I can ensure your brother gets the best medical attention in the world. I can give you a life where you never have to calculate a tip or worry about an overdue bill ever again." Hope, fierce and painful, surged through her, so powerful it almost brought her to tears. For a single beautiful second, she saw Daniel walking again, his hands steady his future, bright and limitless. But she also saw the look in Damien Blackwood's eyes. This wasn't charity. This was business. This was the opening move in a negotiation she didn't understand. "What's the catch?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you want from me?" Damien Blackwood sat back, a flicker of something, was it respect, admiration in his eyes. "I want you to become my wife." The words hung in the air between them, more shocking than a clap of thunder. "I want you to become my wife." Olivia stared at him, certain she had misheard. The clatter of cutlery from a nearby table, George's booming laugh, the sizzle of the grill, it all sounded muffled and distant, as if she were underwater. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. "You heard me correctly," Miss Vance. Damien said, his tone utterly devoid of romance or emotion. It was the same tone he would use to discuss a stock purchase or a corporate merger. "I am proposing a marriage of convenience, a contractual arrangement for a period of 1 year. Olivia felt a wave of dizziness. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "You're insane. You can't be serious." "I am never anything but," he replied coolly. "Let me be clear. This would not be a real marriage in the emotional sense. It would be a business partnership. You would fulfill certain social obligations as Mrs. Blackwood. In return, I will establish a trust for your brother that will cover all his medical expenses for the rest of his life. Furthermore, upon the successful completion of our 1-year contract, you will receive a settlement of $10 million, ensuring your financial independence permanently. $10 million. A lifetime of medical care for Daniel. The numbers were so large they were abstract, meaningless. She felt a hysterical laugh building again, a desperate, wild sound. This man walks into her life drenched and angry, and 3 weeks later offers to buy her for a year. Why she finally managed to choke out. Why on earth would you need to marry a waitress from a diner? A man like you could have anyone. Precisely, he said, a flicker of something dark crossing his features. A man like me is surrounded by people who want something from me. My wealth, my name, my power. My father's will contains a rather archaic but ironclad stipulation to assume full uncontested control of the Ethelred global portfolio. I must be married by my 35th birthday. That birthday is in 6 months. He paused, his jaw tightening. My father believed marriage signified stability, a grounding force. He distrusted a lone wolf. The board of directors shares his antiquated sentiment. They see me as reckless, a brilliant but volatile asset. A wife, they believe, would temper me. It would solidify my position against certain rivals within my own family who would love nothing more than to see me fail. Olivia pictured it instantly, a boardroom full of old men in suits, a den of sharks, and this man, the biggest shark of all, needing to prove he could be tamed. So you want a prop, she said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. A nobody, someone with no connections, no agenda who you can control. I want someone who understands the value of a transaction, he corrected her smoothly. I am offering you the one thing you desire most in the world, your brother's health and future. In exchange, I require something you possess, a believable backstory. You are a hard-working, ordinary woman. Your act of kindness towards me, a stranger, is a verifiable, compelling narrative. You are not seeking my fortune. You didn't know who I was. It makes our romance plausible. It is the perfect story to sell to a skeptical board and a ravenous press. He was laying it all out, the cold, brutal calculus of his plan. She was a chess piece, a perfectly chosen pawn to protect his king. The thought was deeply, profoundly insulting, and yet Daniel's face swam in her vision. Daniel struggling to hold a fork, his frustration a palpable thing. Dr. Matthews's grave expression. The number $250. This is monstrous, she whispered. It is practical. Damien countered, his gaze unwavering. The world is not a fairy tale, Ms. Vance. It is a series of transactions. You are struggling to survive in a system designed to crush you. I am offering you a way out. A way to win. Her mind raced a whirlwind of revulsion and desperate, agonizing temptation. To sell a year of her life, her name, her very identity for Daniel. Was it a sacrifice or a damnation? She would be living a lie, playing a part in a gilded cage, owned by a man who looked at her as if she were a line item on a balance sheet. But what was the alternative? To watch her brother fade away while she worked herself into an early grave for nothing. To live with the knowledge that she could have saved him. But her pride, her sense of self, had stood in the way. What was her pride worth next to Daniel's life? What would it entail? She asked the question, feeling like a betrayal of every principle she held. You would move into my penthouse. We would be seen together at various charity galas, business dinners, and family functions. You would be expected to learn about my world to present yourself as a credible partner. There would be rules. Separate bedrooms, of course. Discretion is paramount. To the outside world, we are a couple who fell in love under unusual circumstances. In private, we are business partners. At the end of 365 days, we file for an amicable, quiet divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. You walk away with your freedom and a fortune. I secure my company. It was so simple, so clean, so utterly soulless. He had thought of everything. She looked out the window. The grey Boston sky seemed to press down on the city, heavy and unforgiving. It felt like her life, a constant, oppressive weight. Damien Blackwood was offering to lift it. The price was just her. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. They weren't tears of sadness, but of rage. Rage at the unfairness of it all, at her own powerlessness, at the terrible, impossible choice he was forcing her to make. "You did this on purpose," she said, her voice shaking with quiet fury. "You investigated me, found my weakest point, and now you're pushing on it with all your might." For the first time, a genuine emotion flickered in Damien's eyes. It looked like guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his cool, pragmatic mask. "I am using the resources available to me to solve a problem," he stated, "just as you are. We are not so different, you and I. We both do what is necessary to protect what we value." She thought of Daniel, of his smile, his courage in the face of so much pain. He was what she valued. He was everything. Olivia took a deep, shuddering breath. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind howling around her. One path led back to the slow, grinding despair she knew. The other was a leap into a glittering, unknown abyss. She looked Damien Blackwood straight in the eye, the man with a storm in his soul, the devil offering a bargain. "Draw up the contract," she said, her voice a ghost of its former self. "I'll do it." 3 days later, Olivia Vance ceased to exist. In her place was the fiancée of Damien Blackwood, a woman sculpted and polished for a role she had never auditioned for. The transition was swift and brutal. Damien's team descended upon her life with the precision of a military operation. A discreet legal team met her at a high-end law firm, where she signed a non-disclosure agreement and a prenuptial contract so thick it could stop a bullet. The lawyer, a severe woman named Ms. Albright, explained the clauses in a dry monotone, detailing the penalties for breach of contract with chilling clarity. It was less a marriage agreement and more a corporate acquisition of her identity. Her 2-room apartment, with its peeling paint and view of a brick wall, was packed up by a silent, efficient moving crew. Her few possessions were put into a climate-controlled storage unit, deemed unsuitable for the Blackwood penthouse. She was given a black Amex card with no credit limit and an appointment with a personal shopper who looked at her worn jeans and faded T-shirts with undisguised pity. The Blackwood penthouse was a sterile palace, in the sky occupying the top 2 floors of a skyscraper overlooking the Boston Harbor. The walls were glass, the floors were polished marble, and the furniture was a collection of sharp-angled minimalist pieces that looked more like art installations than places to sit. It was beautiful, immaculate, and utterly devoid of warmth or personality. It felt like a museum or a mausoleum. Damien was a ghost in his own home. He showed her to her suite of rooms, larger than her entire apartment, with a bathroom clad in Italian marble, and a walk-in closet the size of a small boutique. "These are your quarters," he said, his tone formal. "My rooms are in the West Wing. We have a shared living space, which we will use when entertaining. A staff will see to your needs. Your schedule of public appearances for the next month is on the tablet by the bed." And then he was gone, disappearing into his own wing of the vast, silent apartment, leaving her alone in her new gilded cage. The first few days were a blur of disorientation. She was dressed in designer clothes that felt like costumes. Her hair and makeup were done by professionals who tutted at her split ends, and she was coached in etiquette by a stern woman who taught her which fork to use for fish and how to make meaningless small talk about art and polo. Her first public test was a charity gala for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. She stood beside Damien at the entrance, 1,000 camera flashes exploding in her face. He had a hand placed possessively on the small of her back, a gesture that was meant to look intimate, but felt like a brand. She wore a sapphire silk gown that cost more than she used to make in a year, and diamonds glittered at her throat. She smiled until her face ached, repeating the rehearsed lines of their story. We met by chance, Damien would say, his voice a smooth, convincing baritone. I was having a terrible day, and she showed me a kindness I'll never forget. I didn't know who he was. She would add, her voice sounding surprisingly steady. I just saw someone who needed a little help. The story was a sensation. The Billionaire and the Waitress. It was a modern-day fairy tale, and the press devoured it. They were the city's most talked-about couple. But behind the closed doors of the limousine on the way home, the silence was deafening. He would retreat to his phone, scrolling through market reports, and she would stare out the window at the city she no longer recognized. The true trial, however, was meeting his family. Genevieve Blackwood. Damien's stepmother was a woman who seemed to be carved from ice. She was elegant, beautiful, and had eyes as cold and calculating as a shark's. She looked Olivia up and down with a barely concealed sneer. A waitress, Genevieve said, her voice dripping with condescension during a tense dinner at the Blackwood family mansion in Beacon Hill. How novel. Damien, you always were one for dramatic gestures. Beside her sat Richard Sterling, Damien's cousin, and his chief rival at Ethelred Capital. Richard was handsome, in a slick, predatory way, with a smile that never reached his eyes. I think it's wonderfully romantic, Richard said, his tone laced with insincerity. A true Cinderella story. Tell me, Olivia, was it love at first sight? Or did you have to see the balance sheet first? Damien's hand tightened on his wine glass. That's enough, Richard. Olivia felt a flush of anger rise in her cheeks. These people were looking at her as if she were an insect. She was the dirt they were afraid Damien had tracked into their pristine, sterile world. She lifted her chin, meeting Richard's mocking gaze directly. Actually, Richard, it was his personality that won me over, she said, her voice sweet as poison. You meet one charming, entitled man who thinks his money makes him interesting. You've met them all. Damien was at least quiet. The table fell silent. Richard's smile faltered. Genevieve's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. Across the table, Olivia could have sworn she saw the corner of Damien's mouth twitch in a suppressed smile. It was the first time she had felt like something other than a well-dressed doll. She had a voice, and she could use it. Later that night, back in the silent penthouse, Damien found her standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the glittering city lights. You handled yourself well tonight, he said, his voice startling her. He stood several feet away, maintaining their unspoken boundary. They're awful people, she stated simply. Yes, he agreed without hesitation. They see you as a vulnerability, a weakness they can exploit to get to me. They will not stop trying to dig up some dirt on you to expose our arrangement for the sham that it is. Let them dig, Olivia said, a surprising fierceness in her voice. My life is an open book, a boring, sad open book, but there are no dark secrets. He was silent for a long moment, his grey eyes studying her. Don't be so certain, Olivia, he said, his voice low and tinged with something she couldn't identify. Everyone has secrets. The trick is knowing who buried them. His words sent a chill down her spine. In this world of unimaginable wealth and power, she was beginning to understand that the truth was just another commodity to be bought and sold. And in her past, which she thought was so simple, there might be a secret she didn't even know existed. A secret that people like Genevieve and Richard would stop at nothing to find. The Viridian Dynamics trial for Daniel was approved. The first wire transfer from Damien's account, a staggering sum that made Olivia feel faint, was completed without comment. Daniel and their aunt, who had come to stay with him, were flown by private jet to the clinic in Geneva. Olivia spoke to him every day on video calls. For the first time in years, she saw genuine, unclouded hope in her brother's eyes. The dark circles under her own began to fade. The bargain, no matter how Faustian was working. She was saving him. This knowledge settled something in her. It gave her a foothold in the slippery, unreal world she now inhabited, with the primary source of her anxiety being managed by Damien's limitless funds. She found she had space to breathe, to observe, to think. Her life became a structured routine of public appearances and private isolation. At galas, Damien would play the part of the devoted fiancé, his hand a constant, steady presence on her back. He taught her the names and histories of the city's power players, whispering them into her ear like state secrets. In public, they were a team. In private, they were strangers sharing an opulent fishbowl. But slowly, imperceptibly, cracks began to form in the armor of their arrangement. It started with small things. He noticed she only ever drank coffee from a specific simple white mug, ignoring the delicate porcelain cups the housekeeper set out. One morning, she found a dozen of the plain white mugs neatly arranged in the cupboard. He never said a word about it. She discovered he worked late into the night in his study, the only light in the sprawling penthouse coming from under his door. One night, unable to sleep, she found a tray with a sandwich and a glass of milk left outside his study. She made one for him, leaving it on the table by the door, before scurrying back to her room. The next morning, the tray was empty. It became a silent ritual, the first real conversation they had that wasn't about schedules or strategy, happened one rainy Thursday night. A thunderclap rattled the immense windows of the penthouse, and Olivia, who had always hated thunderstorms, jumped. She was in the cavernous living room, trying to read a book when Damien emerged from his study. He saw her flinch at another crash of thunder. "You're afraid of storms?" he asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. Not afraid, she corrected, her pride stung. "I just don't like them." He walked over to the bar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. It was a fine Scotch, smoky and warm. "My mother hated them too," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He stood by the window looking out at the tempest. She used to say they were a reminder that for all our planning and posturing, some things are utterly beyond our control. It was the first time he had ever mentioned his mother, who had died when he was a teenager. It was a small opening, a glimpse behind the curtain. "My mum loved them," Olivia found herself saying. She loved the colour of the sky before the storm hit. She said it was the most honest colour in the world. "She's the one who gave me that red umbrella." He turned from the window to look at her, his grey eyes losing their usual guardedness. "Tell me about her." And so she did. She spoke of her parents, of their small, happy life before the car accident that took them both. She spoke of her dream to be a writer, a dream she had packed away with her books when Daniel got sick. She spoke of her life before it became a series of desperate calculations. He listened, not interrupting his gaze fixed on her. When she finished, a raw silence filled the room thick with unspoken things. "You gave up a lot for him," he said, quietly. "You don't give up anything for family," she replied. "You just do what needs to be done." His expression was complex, a mixture of admiration and something that looked like regret. "My family is different. For us, family is a battlefield, alliances, betrayals, casualties. My father raised me to see every interaction as a negotiation, every relationship as a potential liability. That sounds lonely, she said softly. It is, he admitted the word, a stark confession in the quiet room, which is why what you did that day at the diner, it made no sense to me. It was an illogical act. There was no benefit to you, only a cost. It violated every rule I've ever lived by. Maybe you've been living by the wrong rules, she suggested. A long silence stretched between them. The storm outside began to subside, its fury spent. In its wake, the atmosphere in the room had changed. The line between them, the rigid boundary of their contract, had blurred. For the first time, she didn't see Damien Blackwood, CEO. She saw a lonely, powerful man who had been taught that kindness was a weakness. And he saw not a waitress he had hired, but a woman of quiet, unyielding strength. Their public appearances became less of a performance. The smiles came a little easier. The way he looked at her held a new warmth that the cameras caught, and the gossip columnists noted with glee. Richard and Genevieve watched this transformation with increasing alarm. A genuine connection between Damien and Olivia was a threat to their plans. They needed to find a way to shatter it. Richard hired a private investigator, a ruthless man with a reputation for unearthing secrets people thought were buried forever. Find something on her, Richard ordered. I don't care what it is. A past lover, a secret debt, a family scandal. Find me a crack in her perfect working-class hero facade. Find me the weapon that will destroy her, and by extension, destroy him. The investigator nodded. Everybody has something to hide, Mr. Sterling. It's just a matter of digging deep enough. The investigator, a man named Philip Costa, was thorough. He started with the public records, the easy-to-find details of Olivia's life birth certificate, school records, her parents' death certificates. It was, as she had told Damien, a boringly normal life marked by tragedy and financial struggle. But Costa wasn't paid to look at the surface. He was paid to dig until he hit bedrock, and then to fracture it. He went further back. He pulled the employment records of her parents, Robert and Maria Vance. Her mother had been a nurse, her father an architect. Costa focused on the father, Robert Vance. He cross-referenced Robert's employment history with every company that had ever had dealings with Ethelred Capital, and that's when he found it. For 3 years long before Daniel's illness, Robert Vance had worked for a high-end architectural firm, Sterling and Thorne, a firm that had been the lead designer for Ethelred Capital's new European headquarters in London, a flagship project. And then suddenly, Robert Vance had been fired. The official reason cited in his file was professional negligence, leading to significant project delays and budget overruns. He had been disgraced, forced to sign a stringent non-disclosure agreement, and had struggled to find meaningful work ever since. The financial strain Costa's report speculated had been a contributing factor to the Vances taking on extra work driving home late on the night of their fatal accident. The most damning detail, however, was the signature at the bottom of Robert Vance's termination letter. The man who had fired him, who had ruined his career and reputation, was not some anonymous HR manager. It was Damien's father, the formidable patriarch Alistair Blackwood Sr. When Richard Sterling read the report, he laughed. It was a cold, triumphant sound. This was better than a secret lover or a hidden debt. This was perfect. It reeked of conspiracy. It painted Olivia not as an innocent waitress, but as an avenging daughter, a plant in an elaborate long con to get revenge on the Blackwood family. It didn't even have to be true. It just had to be believable enough to plant the seed of doubt. It would shatter Damien's trust in her and make him a laughingstock in front of his board. The annual Blackwood Foundation Gala was the perfect venue. The pinnacle of the Boston social calendar, it was attended by everyone who mattered in the city's finance, political, and cultural scenes. Richard planned his attack with meticulous care. Meanwhile, in the penthouse, the fragile truce between Olivia and Damien was blossoming into something more. They found themselves talking late into the night, sharing stories, fears, and dreams they had never told another soul. He confessed the immense pressure of his father's legacy, the constant weight of expectation. She showed him the half-finished novel she kept on a flash drive, a story she had started years ago. He read it in one night and looked at her the next morning with a newfound awe. "You're a wonderful writer, Olivia," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You can't let this go." One evening, as they stood on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, he reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. The touch was electric. His fingers lingered on her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. His stormy eyes were soft, questioning. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her heart hammering in her chest. The contract, the rules, the pretense, it all melted away in that moment, leaving only the undeniable connection that had sparked between them. He leaned in, and she tilted her head, up her eyes, fluttering shut. His phone buzzed a harsh, intrusive sound. The moment was broken. He pulled his hand back, as if burned his professional mask, slamming back into place. It was a call from his head of security. There was a problem. An hour later, Damien sat in his study, staring at a file on his desk. It was a copy of the same report Richard had commissioned. His own security team tasked with monitoring any external investigations into Olivia had intercepted it. He read it once, then twice. The words blurred. Robert Vance, professional negligence, terminated by Alistair Blackwood. A cold sickness churned in his stomach. He remembered the London project. He had been a young vice president then. He remembered his father's rage about delays, his ruthless decision to make an example of the lead architect. He had never known the man's name. The timing, the connection. It was a devastating coincidence. Or was it? The doubt, poisonous and potent, crept in just as Richard had intended. Was it possible? Could this whole thing, starting with that rainy day, have been a setup? Had she known who he was all along? His mind recoiled from the thought. It didn't square with the woman he had come to know, the woman who left sandwiches outside his door, who spoke of her mother with such love, whose eyes held no deceit, but his entire life had been a lesson in betrayal. Trust was a fool's luxury. When Olivia knocked on his study door later that evening, her face hopeful, her heart still fluttering from their moment on the balcony, she found a different man. The warmth was gone, replaced by a glacial coldness. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat. He didn't invite her to sit. He simply pushed the file across the polished surface of his desk. "My security team flagged this tonight. It appears my cousin has been doing some digging into your family." Olivia picked it up, her brow furrowed in confusion. She began to read. She saw her father's name. She saw Ethelred Capital. She saw the words professional negligence and termination. A story she had never known, a piece of her family's pain that had been hidden from her, was laid bare in a cold, typewritten report. Her father hadn't just lost a job. He had been destroyed by Damien's family. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. She looked at Damien, and the coldness in his expression finally made sense. "You think," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You think I knew?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her. His face, an unreadable mask of suspicion. The silence was his answer. The fragile, beautiful thing that had been growing between them shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. He didn't trust her. After everything they had shared, his first instinct was to believe she was capable of such a monstrous, calculated deception. The pain was a physical blow stealing the air from her lungs. This was a betrayal far deeper than any contract violation. He had looked into her heart and seen a schemer. "I didn't know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "My God, Damien. My father never spoke of it. He was too proud, too broken. I never knew." "It's quite a coincidence, Olivia," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That's all it is," she cried, her hands clenched into fists. "Don't you know me at all?" But she could see in his eyes that he didn't. Not really. When faced with a choice between trusting her and trusting the brutal lessons his father had taught him, he had chosen his father. "Richard plans to reveal this at the gala tomorrow night," he said, ignoring her plea. "He will paint you as a con artist. He will use it to challenge my fitness to lead the company." Olivia stared at him, her heartbreak curdling into a cold, hard fury. He wasn't worried about her, about the truth, about the pain this revelation caused her. He was worried about his company. That's all it had ever been about. The later-night talks, the shared moments, the almost kiss, it was all an illusion. She was a business asset, and her value was about to plummet. "Then let him," she said, her voice dripping with ice. She wiped her tears away with the back of her hand. "Let this whole disgusting charade come crashing down. I'm done. The contract is broken." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Damien standing alone with the secret that had just destroyed them both. The night of the Blackwood Foundation Gala arrived with a storm, a bitter echo of the day they met. Inside the penthouse, Olivia packed a small bag. The funds for Daniel's treatment were secure in an irrevocable trust. Damien had kept his side of the bargain. Her part in the charade was over. She was leaving her heart a hollow ache of what might have been. In his study, Damien faced a similar turmoil. The poisonous doubt Richard had planted had faded, replaced by a terrible clarity. He had let his father's legacy of suspicion cloud his judgment and hurt the one person who had shown him selfless kindness. He had been a fool, and he was about to lose her. He found her by the door, bag in hand. "Don't go," he pleaded, his voice raw with an emotion she'd never heard from him. "Olivia, I was wrong. Wrong to ever doubt you. This stopped being a contract a long time ago. I'm falling in love with you." Before she could process his words, his phone buzzed. It was security. Richard Sterling was on stage at the gala beginning his speech. The final attack was underway. The moment of decision was upon them. Olivia looked from Damien's desperate, hopeful face to the stormy world outside. She would not run. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm. They walked into the glittering ballroom, just as Richard's voice boomed from the speakers, a story of revenge starring none other than Olivia Vance and her disgraced father. A shocked gasp rippled through the crowd. Damien, holding Olivia's hand tightly, strode to the stage and took the microphone from his stunned cousin. "My cousin is correct that there is a story of disgrace," Damien announced, his voice ringing with authority. "But the disgrace is my family's." He told the crowd the truth of how his father had ruined Robert Vance, and he apologized publicly. Olivia knew nothing of this. He continued, turning to her, his eyes full of adoration. "She is the most honest and courageous person I have ever met. Our engagement is not a sham. It is the truest thing in my life." Then, in front of the city's elite, Damien dropped to one knee. "The contract is void," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "But my offer is not. Marry me, Olivia. For real this time. Through tears, Olivia looked at the man who had entered her life like a tempest, now offering her not a bargain, but his whole heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He rose to kiss her, and the stunned silence of the ballroom erupted into thunderous applause, a celebration not of a merger, but of a love that had weathered its final storm. In a world that often rewards cynicism, the story of Olivia and Damien reminds us of the profound world-altering power of a single selfless act. It shows that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or penthouses, but in courage, integrity, and the willingness to trust another soul. Their journey from a contractual arrangement to a genuine partnership was fraught with secrets, betrayal, and the ghosts of the past. But in the end, they chose not the easy path of suspicion, but the brave path of vulnerability and love. They proved that even in the most gilded of cages, the human heart can find a way to break free, and that sometimes the greatest offer you can receive isn't one you can't refuse, but one you can't imagine living without. What would you have done in Olivia's place? Was Damien's offer a lifeline or a trap? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of unexpected love and sacrifice moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a story with a twist, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas that will touch your heart. Thank you for listening.